Hello class and welcome to MUS 222, the History and Sociology of Rock Music. My name is Mrs. Gatewood and I will be your teacher this semester. So get ready as we go through our introductions, and then also we will start on the first lecture. Please make sure you have your lecture notes downloaded and printed off so that you can participate in lecture 1. All right, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Mrs. Gatewood. I am originally from St. Louis, Missouri. That's where I was born and raised. And I was in band starting in 5th grade and played trumpet. And then I decided that I wanted to make music a career of mine. So I went to Campbellsville University in Campbellsville, Kentucky, where I got my bachelor's in music education. From there, I taught for 5 years at a public school. I taught 5th through 12th grade band. I did marching band and pep band and concert band, jazz band. I even did some choir. I did 5th grade beginning band, junior high band, and lots of other musical things I can't even think about. But so I did a lot there. And during that time, I was working on my master's in music education from the University of Illinois. And I completed it while I was teaching. I had my son and taught for another year and a half, and after I had my second child, my daughter, I decided to stay home for a little bit, and I have been kind of a stay-at-home mom for about 2 years, and then I started getting back into teaching. That's when we moved out here to Kentucky, is right after I chose to stay home, and about a year and a half, 2 years later, we jumped into teaching, or I jumped into teaching at Gateway. And I've been teaching here since January of 2012, so I've been here for quite a while now. Like I said, I was a band director for many years. I still teach lots of private lessons, and I do lots of gigs, and I play for church and all those different types of things. But I've been an adjunct here at Gateway since 2012, and I've been an adjunct at NKU. And if anybody in here is going on to NKU as an elementary education major, you'll be required to take one of my classes up there. So I look forward to seeing some of you. The fun part is getting to have students at different schools in different semesters. And I've had quite a few that have been in the Gateway program and moved on to NKU and have been in my NKU education class there. So that's a little bit about me. I am married to my husband. It has been 16 years as the time I'm making this current video. And my son is getting ready to go into 6th grade. He has picked trombone out to start band this year. And my daughter is going into 4th grade. And my youngest one is just turned 3 in May. So, and again, depending on when you're watching this, they may be a little bit older. This is 2020 currently. So what we're going to do is one of our very first activities in class is I want to know who you are. I want to know your name, where you're from. If you have a major, if it's undecided, that's completely fine. Whatever musical background you have, and please don't tell me no musical background. You make sure that you have some sort of musical background, whether or not it's I like to listen to rap, whether I like to listen to country music, what genre of music you enjoy, that is a musical background. So make sure you have that prepared for me, as well as one fun fact. And so when we get into class, or if we do this online, you will be giving me those answers. So please have them prepared for our first meeting. All right, so we are now going to start on our lecture 1, The Roots of Rock. Right now, what I want you to do is I want you to think of your favorite rock and roll song, okay? Think, what song is your favorite thing to listen to? Is it Elvis Presley's Hound Dog, or possibly Ozzy Osbourne with Crazy Train? I can tell you, when I taught high school years ago, that was a favorite of most of my high schoolers. Maybe you enjoy Guns N' Roses' Sweet Child of Mine, but whether you prefer country rock or heavy metal rock, 50s rock or 80s rock, no matter what type of genre that you like to listen to, they all come from similar roots. And genre is just a way of saying type of music. Many events helped to shape today's rock music. During the colonial times, entertainment music was prohibited. Strictly religious music was allowed, but after the Revolutionary War, entertainment music became more commonplace and more acceptable. Early 19th century Americans could read music and play the piano. Popular music was composed to sing in the home. Mid-19th century American music began to take on a more diverse character, which was influenced by British music and European opera, while still maintaining some of those very American characteristics. So as you can see here on our timeline, how things kind of started out and progressed throughout time. Stephen Foster was classically trained and knowledgeable in art music of the day, which earned him the title of Father of American Music. Although he was classically trained, he was friends with an entertainer named Dan Rice, who worked in a circus as a clown and blackface singer. He many times sat at the piano with his friends, writing and singing minstrel songs through the night. Through this pastime, he began to merge these two genres together and write music. And so I have an example here for you. Hopefully most of you that are from Kentucky, we may have some people from another area, but that you know My Old Kentucky Home, this is our state song. So if you click the link below the video, you'll be able to listen to a little bit of that. During the late 1800s, a variety show that included songs, dances, and comical skits called minstrel shows were being performed around the country. These are lively, syncopated minstrel songs that form the very center of the minstrel show, merging the rural American folk traditions with this urban composed music. And this really did create the first distinctively American genre. As you can see from the picture we have, blackface was very commonly used. And the video link I have for you, which I'm going to ask you to hit the pause button, click that link and watch a little bit of it. You're going to see some minstrel shows. And this was very, very common. Now, I know, especially with the times that we're in, blackface is not a good thing, but we can't just hide history. I want you to be able to see history so that you can learn from it and we don't make these mistakes again. So go ahead and click these links here and check out what a minstrel show was really like. So publishers and songwriters of Tin Pan Alley began to supply popular music for these types of shows, and many of America's most beloved songs, which we call the standards, came from here. This includes songs for amusement, entertainment, and escape. These songs were also made available in written form to the general public through the sale of sheet music. Tin Pan Alley was originally an actual place on 28th Street between Broadway and 6th Avenue in New York, where most of the publishing companies set up shop. So take a look at this picture right here. As you notice, we've got lots of music publishing companies all right there in one spot. And so I know over time the way we purchase music has changed. Back when I was in high school and college, we used to buy CDs. You would go to the store and you would buy a CD. Back when I was in grade school, it used to be tapes, okay? I'm showing my age right now. But before we ever purchased a CD or a tape or anything like that, we would go to the store and there would be places where you could grab headphones and put them on and actually listen to the music before you purchase it. That's very common. Most of us don't purchase music without actually having listened to it first, right? Or being very familiar with maybe the artist and we want to purchase their music because we know that we've heard their music before. But regardless, we generally don't purchase music unless we hear it. So as you can imagine, back in the day, before we had recordings and before we had radio, we had this Tin Pan Alley here, so this street here where people would go to purchase their sheet music, and they would walk in store and there would be somebody sitting at the piano player. So they would get a piece of sheet music and they would bring it to the piano player and they would play it for them and sing it and let them know what it sounded like so that you could decide whether or not you wanted to purchase this music. So this is where the nickname came from. The New York Herald referred to the sounds made by many pianos all playing different tunes, being exactly like the banging of many tin pans in the alleyway. Okay, so if you stood out on that street and you could hear all of the different music publishing companies at the same time playing their pianos and you can listen to it from the street, that's where that nickname came from. The music of Tin Pan Alley composers defined much of our popular song catalog of the era and was eventually used not only for theatrical shows but also for popular songs, Hollywood movies, and jazz standards. Now I have an example down here and in the link. Please make sure you click it below the video and listen to it. You're going to recognize this Tin Pan Alley song. We sing it all the time. We just didn't realize that this is where it came from, and most of you probably didn't even realize that there were verses to this song. So see if you recognize it as it gets started, and then let me know whether or not you were surprised to know that this song actually had verses to it. Among the greatest Tin Pan Alley composers, we have Irving Berlin, who wrote songs like God Bless America and White Christmas that we're pretty familiar with. George and Ira Gershwin. George Gershwin's a little bit more well known, but his brother Ira is also part of this. I Got Rhythm. George Gershwin, there's tons of tunes from him that you're probably very familiar with. And then we also have people like Oscar Hammerstein II, who wrote lots of music for Broadway musicals, including South Pacific, Oklahoma, and The Sound of Music. So again, in the description box below or below this video on Blackboard, I have links to these. Make sure you pause here, click, and listen so you get an idea of what this music actually sounded like. Minstrel shows were eventually replaced with another type of variety show called the vaudeville show. Like the minstrel show, these were unrelated acts which featured Tin Pan Alley songs. But unlike minstrel shows, they represented a new direction of American popular music by dealing with contemporary life in what was predominantly a rural society. Vaudevilles were also considered very clean and polite. This was to get the family and the female-based audiences in the door as well. So the sale of liquor was barred, certain types of material were eliminated, and attendees were actually given gifts. Now, what could get you to go to a concert more than laundry detergent? So laundry detergent was actually one of the hot items to get to go to these shows. I do have some historic footage here. It's linked in the description box below or below the video in Blackboard. Hit pause and click this. It is quite long, so you can feel free to skip around and see the different types of acts, but it's very interesting to watch this historic footage. The blues is a uniquely American musical form. It was born in the southern middle states sometime between the years of 1880 and 1900. It evolved from the work songs, shouts, and field hollers sung by slaves in plantation fields and prison camps. Songs sung to accompany various daily jobs and duties were a very functional part of everyday life in Africa because this was to improve their quality of life. However, in the New World, the very nature of the work song began to change, and over time, the songs sung in the fields became personal expressions of both a pain and oppression. It is from this context that the blues evolved. They were commonly sung in a call and response type of fashion. This is where the leader would sing the first line and the rest would echo. So I do have an example for you of a work song specifically from a chain gang. If you're not familiar with chain gang, this is people that were in prison and they would have to work, like say on the side of the road, or they'd work for the railroad or whatever they would do. So please click that link and check out that call and response type of work song that they're using. After the Civil War, thousands of free slaves began traveling through the South looking for work, armed with no job skills to speak of other than a common laborer. Once Reconstruction ended, life became increasingly bleak for many of them, as newly enacted Jim Crow laws and racial oppression became commonplace. Singing in work camps, street corners, and jute joints for food and tips was one of the few professions available to the black man in which he wasn't directly working for a white man. Preaching was another one of these jobs, and in fact, many of the first blues singers were former preachers. So if you're not familiar with the Jim Crow laws, I'm sure you've heard it being brought up in the talk that's going on today as we discuss the racial issues. A lot of people I have found over the years as I'm teaching this class didn't know what Jim Crow laws were. They've heard it being said, But basically, these were laws that were enacted throughout the United States, so different laws in different states at times, where you had to have equality but separation for the races. So if you had bathrooms, for instance, as you can see the picture here, you had to have one for whites and one for blacks. So that would be considered equality. Now, we definitely don't consider that equality today. In fact, we consider that quite racist today. But this is what was going on. There's other laws like white nurses were not allowed to have black patients, different things like that. And so we'll get into looking into the Jim Crow laws a lot more in one of our very first discussions when we meet in class. But I wanted you to know what the Jim Crow laws are, as I realized more and more as I do this throughout the years that people honestly just don't know what these laws are. Today, many scholars speculate that the blues started in the Mississippi Delta. This is a 250-mile oval of land stretching south from Memphis, Tennessee to Vicksburg, Mississippi. Okay, so kind of getting an idea of where the blues started here, you can take a look at this picture and kind of understand what is going on there. The first blues performers were solo singers who accompanied themselves on the guitar in this kind of rambling and spontaneous fashion that became known as country blues. These performers worked out the basic standard blues formula in the backwoods away from anyone who might have been interested. And unfortunately, there are no recording devices at this time, so we don't have documentation of exactly how the blues formula came to be. Blues artists sang lyrics in a specific way, and we're going to look at that the next slide here. But what I want you to do is, while you are finishing your notes for this, I want you to click the link for the Black Snake Moan. Give it a little listen what country blues sounds like. So there was an actual formula to the blues, and they would sing their lyrics in these 3-line phrases, which we called the AAB lyric form. This was over 12 bars or 12 measures in length. And with each phrase being answered by a guitar in a call and response fashion. Now, I say guitar, it could also be another instrument. Most blues artists would accompany themselves on guitar, but you will see with some of our listenings that we have some blues artists that would sing with actual band accompaniment, and you would hear like maybe a trumpet that would be the response there. But for the most part, because most of them were singing by themselves, it was them and their guitar. So the melody of the AAB format is going to be performed over a 12-bar chord progression. And so we call this the 12-bar blues, which consists of 3 chords that are built on the 1st, the 4th, and the 5th notes of a major scale. They were referred to by the Roman numerals 1, 4, and 5. Okay? Now, what I want you to do here is I want you to take a second and click the link that says the 12-bar bar blues chord progression. Now, this is something that I wish we could have live class because I want to point and show you how these chord progressions work. But what you want to do is you want to listen and count 4 beats. Every 4 beats, the measure is going to change, and you will hear the chord change as we change. So as you can see, the whole first 4 measures are all the first chord. But then when we get to the second line, you're going to hear chord 4 in that measure. The next one's going to be chord 4, and then it's going to go back to 1 for 2 more measures. Then we go to 5 on the bottom there, 4, and then 1, and then it is going to stay in 1 and go back to the beginning. And then it repeats itself. So you can keep going through these 12-bar blues. The distinct sounds of the blues melody is in large part due to the use of notes outside the major scale called blue notes. Now, I have a picture here for you. Obviously, I can't play it for you, but you can see where the scale is quite different. When we have a major scale, it's going to be 8 notes, but it's really 7 different notes. The top note is just an octave higher, but it is actually the same note as the bottom note. I know that might be confusing, sorry. but it's 8 notes in a specific way. Now the blues notes are quite different. As you can see, it is not going straight up. We have some skips and we have some that stay on the same line. So it's designed a little bit differently and it sounds different. So performers would also put other effects in, such as blending tones or sliding into and out of pitches to enhance that moaning, mournful, bluesy quality. These are also very characteristic to rock music. All right, so what I want you to do here is I want you, if you have your notes printed off, you're going to see the lyrics for Lost Your Head Blues by Bessie Smith. I want you to click that link and listen to the song, and I want you to label it. So we're going to label it in our AAB form, okay? So take a couple minutes and listen to this song and label your notes AAB. Now, hopefully you have something like this come out. I was with you, baby, when you didn't have a dime. There's A, and then it repeats itself. I was with you, baby, you didn't have a dime, and now B. Now, since you got a lot of money, you've thrown your good gal down. Now, this one is actually not rhyming, but most of the time they did rhyme. So when you look at the second verse, once ain't for always and two ain't for twice. Again, once ain't for always and two ain't for twice. And then B, when you get a good gal, you better treat her nice. So twice and nice do rhyme. Majority of these AAB forms do rhyme. Obviously, that first lyric did not, but that's okay. When we go to work on one of our discussions together, the idea is to have the A's and the B's rhyme. The blues gained its popularity in the 1920s with the first commercially sold blues recording, with what became known as classic blues singers. When Crazy Blues by Mamie Smith sold 1 million copies within a year of its 1920 release, record companies realized that there was actually a very huge untapped black consumer market. So pause here and take a second and listen to a little bit of Crazy Blues by Mamie Smith. Most of the classic blues recordings were released on small independent labels that specialized in race music. One famous classic blues singer is Bessie Smith, who is known as the Empress of the Blues. She was even featured in a movie called The St. Louis Blues. She inspired singer Janis Joplin, who even bought her tombstone for her grave when she found out that she didn't have one. In 1929, the Depression almost killed the record industry and did manage to actually finish off the classic blues era. Take a second here, pause, and listen to St. Louis Blues by Bessie Smith, and I want you to listen for the pitch bending in her voice that we talked about as one of the characteristics. It wasn't until 1925 that the first country blues singers began to record. It was that year that Blind Lemon Jefferson recorded Black Snake Moan in Chicago, after having worked his way north through the Mississippi Delta from his native Texas. Pause here and listen to a little bit of Black Snake Moan. Huddie Ledbetter, and he's better known as Leadbelly, surfaced in the 1940s New York City folk scene with Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger after several troublesome years in and out of prison. Now, go ahead and listen to his link. We're actually going to go over one of his songs specifically in a discussion during class time, but take a second and listen to his music. And you can actually start playing it at 1 minute and 50 seconds because that is where the music really gets going. The most spine-tingling blues performances came from the haunting vocals and bottleneck guitars of the Delta bluesmen, such as Charlie Patton, Willie Brown, Son House, and, of course, Robert Johnson. Although Johnson only recorded 29 sides during his life, his songs are among the most influential in American history, including Crossroad Blues. Johnson's singing and guitar playing on these recordings is riveting even today. Now, unfortunately, His life ended before he achieved any real national attention when a jealous husband poisoned him at a juke joint outside of Greenwood, Mississippi in 1938. He died at 27 years old. Now, I want you to listen to a little bit of the Crossroad Blues here. Now, we are going to do a little bit more study deep into the Crossroad Blues lyrics, but I want you to just listen. I want you to listen for the call and response of the guitar. I want you to listen to the AAB form. I want you to listen for the 12-bar blues, and I want you to listen to the string bending on the guitar. Now, if you are interested and want to go a little bit further, search for Eric Clapton's cover of the Crossroad Blues. Now, what's funny is most people that do know this song know it more from Eric Clapton, and they thought that it was his original. He's actually covering Robert Johnson's song. So click on or search for Eric Clapton's cover, which I don't have linked, but that you can look on your own, and listen to it and listen to the characteristics that are the same. The call and response, the AAB form, the fact that there's 12-bar blues. Listen for those characteristics in his song, but it's going to be slightly different because it's more of a rock and roll and less of a blues version. Something else I'd love for you to check out, if you're familiar with the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? They actually use part of Johnson's story. So there's an idea that went around that he went to the crossroads one day and he met the devil and he sold his soul to the devil to be able to play guitar. Now this is just a little folklore, and they believe the Crossroad Blues song is actually about him going to the crossroads. And we'll talk again more about this when we meet for our discussion. But Oh Brother, Where Art Thou took this and they put it in their movie. Now the character's name is Tommy Johnson instead of Robert Johnson, but it is about this idea that he went to the crossroads. I do have a link to this clip in the video, so please feel free to just pause and stop and watch this to kind of see the idea behind the crossroads. By this time, millions of African Americans were starting to head north to Chicago and other northern industrialized cities in search of a better life. They wanted to escape poverty and racism of the South. The blues followed them and started to thrive in this new environment. The blues piano style known as boogie woogie was cultivated in Kansas City and Chicago and created a national fad. Now, when you listen to this one, I want you to see if you can think of a rock and roll or a performer that sounds very similar to Boogie Woogie, and I'm actually thinking of somebody more of the 1950s rock and roll. And so as you listen, you may not be familiar with 1950s, and so we'll talk about this person later on, but I want you to see if you can guess that person that you hear. Chicago was also where Delta bluesmen began to start amplifying their guitars to be heard over the din of the crowded clubs on the South Side. One of the first to define the new electric style known as urban blues or Chicago blues was a Delta transplant named McKinley Morganfield, who went by the name Muddy Waters. Among his classic records, you're going to find I'm Your Hoochie Coochie Man there. All right, now I do have some American Roots music videos that I'm hoping that I will be able to show for my online version of COVID-19 class. Now, if we are back in the regular classroom when you're watching these videos at a later date, then I will definitely be showing these videos to you in the classroom, okay? So don't worry about filling out those answers to those questions there. We will get to those. Jazz developed as a parallel universe alongside the blues throughout the first half of the 20th century, originally evolving as an ensemble form in New Orleans called Dixieland. Jazz, like the blues, worked its way north to Chicago around 1920 due to urban reform of Storyville. And Storyville, the idea with this, so Storyville is a red light district. So if you're not familiar with what red light district means, so this is basically where all the badness is happening. Anything that's socially not acceptable is going on. You have brothels, so you have gambling joints, you have saloons and dance halls. You have all of these things going on and obviously not a good thing to have. So basically the government came in and they shut down all of this red light district due to moral corruption. And so after it was shut down, these musicians had to go somewhere else, and that's why they were moving. So let's talk about jazz. What is jazz? Well, jazz is usually notated, but it's never played as written. So as you can see over here in this picture, I have 4/8 notes. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry about what you see, but what you hear. If we were to play this like it is written, it would sound like this. Ta, 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 ta. Ta, 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 ta. Okay? But if you're playing in a jazz-like style, we're going to what we call swing this. And we're going to give more emphasis to the first note and less emphasis to the second note. So it would sound like this. Ta, 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 ta. Ta, 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 ta. So you notice it is a little different with that swing style. Like the blues, one can slide in and out of pitches or bend the pitches. And then an important characteristic to jazz is improvising the music or making it up as you perform it. Okay? So this is actually one of the main things of jazz, is just making up the music as you go along. Now there are actual rules and structures to improvising. You're usually going to improvise over the 12-bar blues, and the music is just going to be made up on the spot. It does take a while to understand which notes do work when you're improvising and which notes do not. Some of the very best classically trained musicians will actually struggle with this type of playing, even though they're very educated and can read music real well. As far as coming up with their own music, sometimes is very, very difficult for them. Syncopation is where you are going to be playing the off beats. And this is another very important characteristic to jazz. And so this is when you give emphasis to beats that you normally don't emphasize. And so music in general, we always emphasize the downbeat. But when you play syncopation, you're going to emphasize the upbeat. You're going to emphasize beats that aren't the first beat of the measure, which is usually the strongest beat. And so that is called syncopation. So right now, hit pause and hit when the Saints go marching in, and listen to a little bit of this jazz style and the improvising and the syncopation, and see if you can hear how it swings and how there's pitch bending involved. Take a second and listen to this. All right, jazz in New Orleans style, or what we also call as Dixieland style, was typically played by a small group of 5 to 8 performers. The melodic instruments, or the front line, including the cornet, which is very familiarly known as the trumpet, the clarinet, and the trombone. The frontline players are going to improvise several contrasting melodic lines at one time. And so this is a very collective type of improvising together. And this is one of the most distinctive features of that Dixieland jazz. The frontline instruments are going to be supported by a rhythm section that clearly marks the beat and provides a background of chords. Now this section usually includes drums, chordal instruments like the banjo, guitar, piano, and a single line low instrument like the plucked bass or the tuba. They use head arrangements where they worked out the music in rehearsal, and then they performed it from memory. One or more courses of this collective improvisation generally occurred at the very beginning and the very end of the piece. So in between, individual players are going to be featured in these improvised solos, and they're accompanied by the rhythm section or by the whole band. Now sometimes there are very brief, and this is usually going to be just a small 1 or 2 bars of unaccompanied solos called breaks. Musicians would also use fills to provide movement while the rhythm of a pattern or phrase stops. These provided embellishments between phrases. As New Orleans style evolved during the 1920s, mainly in Chicago, solo playing came to be emphasized more than collective improvisation. Soloists began to base their improvising less on the original melody and more on its harmonies. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to take a second and listen to Dipper Mouth Blues. Now, Dipper Mouth Blues is a great example of this Dixieland style, and you're going to hear all of those characteristics that we talked about on the last slide there. You're going to hear the front line, you're going to hear the rhythm section, they're playing a head arrangement, there's going to be a solo breaks, and there's also going to be a fill at the very end. So I want you to take a minute and listen to this song. It's only like 2.5 minutes long. Try to listen to it completely so that way you can get an idea of all of these elements in jazz. So it was in the 1920s that the first true innovator, trumpeter Louis Armstrong, revolutionized jazz by turning it into a soloist art form simply on the strength and drama of his virtuoso improvising. Armstrong introduced the world to a unique form of singing called scat singing, and this is basically singing in nonsense syllables. All right, so take a second here and learn a little bit more about Louis Armstrong. There is his bio that you can watch, and then one of his songs that he sings and plays in, What a Wonderful World. And this is actually a song you're probably pretty familiar with. It's used all the time in movies and TV and commercials, so you may be very familiar with this song, you just didn't realize who it came from and what era it came from. From the 1890s to 1915, a style of composed piano music called ragtime flourished. It was developed primarily by African American pianists who traveled to the Midwest and South playing in saloons and dance halls. A man named Scott Joplin is known as the king of ragtime. Some of his most famous pieces included The Entertainer and Maple Leaf Rag. Again, I would love for you to take a second to pause and listen to The Entertainer and Maple Leaf Rag. Now, if you've ever been to Disney World, it's been a while since I've been to Disneyland, so possibly there too, but if you've ever been to Disney World in Magic Kingdom and you walk down that long street while you're looking at the castle, you're going to hear The Entertainer and Maple Leaf Rag being played over the intercom. So we are very familiar with these songs, again, not familiar necessarily with where they came from or their history. But take a second to listen to these rag pieces, is what they would call them, and get to know what it sounds like. By the 1930s, the center of the jazz world had moved to New York, where composers and arrangers such as Duke Ellington had developed the jazz big band that was to become the standard ensemble of the swing era. And so what I want you to do is pause here, look and watch the Duke Ellington mini bio. It's just a few minutes long and you have some video questions there that you need to answer as you watch. So go ahead, pause and watch this video. During the swing era, which occurred between 1935 to roughly 1945, big band jazz or swing music became the dominant form of pop music. Swing brought the recording industry back to life after it was almost killed by the Depression. It helped the country to get through World War II. Swing also firmly established itself as music to dance to, and it spawned dozens of dance fads such as the foxtrot, the Lindy Hop, the jitterbug, and the rumba. As the music professionals began to increasingly treat the music as consumer products, most of the hits were novelty and sing-alongs from the Tin Pan Alley that featured band vocalists. It was in this way that the careers of artists like Frank Sinatra, I'm sure you're familiar with that name, Doris Day, Peggy Lee, and others were launched. Swing bands are made up of a very large ensemble, and because they are made up of such a large group of instrumentalists, music notation is actually required. And so we had the start of band arrangements that were being used. And so many of these bands were starting to become well known because of people that were specifically composing for them or arranging for them. And Duke Ellington is a good example of somebody that was a great composer and arranger for the swing band. Now, take a second here, hit pause, and I want you to listen to Sing, Sing, Sing. This is another one that you're probably familiar with. You just didn't know what it was called. This was also a part of the Chips Ahoy commercial many years ago, and it's also in all kinds of movies and you definitely have probably heard it somewhere within the media that you watch. The first star of the swing era was Benny Goodman. Now, Benny Goodman rose to fame and started when hundreds of teens showed up to hear and dance to music that they had been hearing on the NBC network radio program Let's Dance. He's nicknamed the King of Swing. Goodman was able to bring music of African American culture to the mass white audience because he was white. And you're going to see this done in the 50s as well when we have a white artist, Elvis Presley. He's going to bring black R&B music to a white public just for the mere fact that he is white. So it's kind of interesting how this works. So Benny Goodman was a white jazz musician, and because he was white, he was able to bring that African American jazz music to the white audiences. During the swing era, jazz became America's pop music. Now, I know when we think of pop music today, we definitely aren't thinking jazz, but pop music genre just means basically whatever is popular to the masses. And so even though popular music today means something different, at this time, jazz was our popular music of the time. And so because it was the popular music, the music industry started to manipulate it and caused creative innovation and the musical integrity to start to suffer. Jazz began to reinvent itself around 1940 in the late night jam sessions at tiny nightclubs in Harlem. Modern jazz, or bebop, was created by a small group of young musical revolutionaries in search of a more stimulating musical expression. Bebop's architects were some of the most gifted musical talents America has ever produced. And so these artists included a saxophonist, Charlie Bird Parker, trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie, and pianist Thelonious Monk. Although bebop infused a fresh new vitality into jazz, it also made it impossible for most people to dance to or even listen to. As this popularity of jazz began to diminish around 1946, rhythm and blues became increasingly popular. In the meantime, jazz musicians began to experiment with different stylistic approaches, and this includes cool jazz, hard bop, and free jazz. So what I want you to do is I want you to take a second, pause here, and listen to Hot House so you can get an idea of what bebop sounds like. In 1969, trumpeter Miles Davis, who had often been at the forefront of innovation throughout his musical career, fused rock music and jazz music together. Jazz continues to incorporate these influences from rock and its offshoots to this day. Now, we are more familiar with adding these together today, but at the time this was pretty revolutionary. And in fact, jazz people were very suspicious of rock music. So it was kind of odd to add them together, but Miles Davis did it with a lot of class. Now, if you are not familiar with Miles Davis, there's a lot to learn about him. He's actually done a lot for the music industry, and there's actually an entire movie that was made about him, and it was actually made in Cincinnati. And a fun fact here, my brother-in-law is an extra in that movie. He is sitting in one of the clubs at one of the tables, and you do get to see the back of his head and the smoke from his cigarette go up in the air. So that is a funny story for you there. But you could watch this movie and learn a little bit more about Miles Davis's life.